Blake Ryland paced back and forth in his Florida podcast studio, the harsh glow of the overhead lights casting long shadows across the walls, adorned with patriotic red, white, and blue banners. The Liberty Sound Studios was his fortress, a carefully curated arena where he wielded his voice like a weapon. Tonight was no different. With the midterm elections looming just 2 weeks away, Blake was determined to dominate his next guest, a congresswoman he viewed as just another liberal adversary to be torn apart. Behind the scenes, the crew buzzed with quiet anticipation. Cameras were positioned to catch every nuance, every flash of emotion. The lighting was dialed to emphasize Blake's presence, a commanding figure in his late 40s, ex-federal agent turned conservative firebrand. His sharp jaw tightened, his fingers drummed impatiently on the desk. This was his domain, and he was ready to assert control. But outside the storm of anticipation, in the quiet parking lot, Imani Rhodes sat in her car. The congresswoman from Texas had arrived 30 minutes early, a habit born from years of preparation and hard-won discipline. The late October heat pressed against the glass, but Imani remained cool, her eyes fixed on the stack of notes on her lap. Her calm was not born from naivety, but from a deep well of experience as a civil rights attorney and a legislator known for her composed yet sharp mind. Imani's mind traced the contours of the coming battle. She had watched hours of Blake's previous shows, memorized his patterns, his moments of frustration and triumph. She had practiced maintaining her composure under pressure, trained to redirect aggression without losing herself. Tonight, she would stand as a beacon of professionalism in a sea of noise. She stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply. The studio's entrance loomed ahead, a gateway to a political theater she had no intention of losing. Inside, the hum of equipment mixed with the rustle of crew members prepping for the show. The tension was palpable. Blake was already pacing, his gaze flickering toward the door as if sensing the arrival of his challenger. Imani's footsteps were steady as she entered the studio, her presence serene against the backdrop of impending conflict. She took a seat, unfolded her notes, and reviewed her points one last time. The room was hot, but she didn't flinch. Blake's energy was a tempest, but she was the calm eye at its center. As the clock ticked closer to airtime, the stage was set for a collision of styles, Blake's aggressive, volume-driven approach clashing with Imani's poised, data-driven resolve. The crew exchanged knowing glances. This was no ordinary interview. It was a battle for perception, for influence, for the heart of an audience eager for clarity amidst chaos. Then, the studio doors swung open. Blake strode in, slamming his hand on the desk with a force that echoed through the room. His voice, already edged with anger, sliced through the charged air. The showdown had begun. Imani met his gaze steadily, her expression unshaken. The calm before the storm had arrived. The camera crew snapped into action as the countdown clock ticked toward 0. The host, Blake Ryland, took his seat behind the imposing desk, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He adjusted his microphone, the studio lights brightening to full intensity, casting a warm glow over the set designed meticulously to assert his dominance. The red, white, and blue banners flanking the room, the framed photographs of Republican leaders lining the back wall, and the polished oak desk between them all spoke of power, tradition, and unwavering resolve. Imani Rhodes sat across from him, hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes steady and unflinching. The contrast between the two was striking. Blake's energy was volcanic, bubbling with barely contained aggression, while Imani radiated calm and control, like a lake undisturbed by the storm brewing around it. The opening words came sharp and swift from Blake. "Congresswoman Rhodes, thank you for joining me tonight. Let's get straight to it. Your party keeps talking about helping working families, but many say your policies are destroying the middle class. How do you justify voting for bills that hurt the very people you claim to represent?" Imani's voice was steady as she answered, carefully citing specific data and programs that had benefited her district in Texas. She spoke of expanded healthcare access, education funding, and initiatives to support small businesses. Each fact was laid out with clarity, No embellishment or flourish, just the plain truth backed by numbers. But Blake was unfazed. He cut her off, voice rising. "That's not what I asked. You're dodging the question. Are you going to admit these policies are failing or keep giving me the same rehearsed lines?" A subtle smile played at Imani's lips. She knew this was a performance, one designed to trap her into losing composure or appearing evasive. Instead, she leaned forward slightly and said, "I've answered your question directly. These policies are aimed at building a stronger middle class, and I'd be happy to provide more details if you're willing to listen." Ada. The audience behind the cameras stirred, sensing the tension. The production crew exchanged glances, knowing Blake's approach: overwhelm, interrupt, and provoke until the guest cracked. But Imani remained resolute. The interview continued, Blake shifting gears to immigration, a hot-button topic. His voice sharpened with accusation. "You represent a district near the border, but you vote like someone disconnected from the realities of illegal immigration. How do you sleep at night knowing your party's stance puts American lives at risk?" Imani didn't flinch. She described her first-hand visits to border communities, discussions with law enforcement and bipartisan leaders, and efforts to address root causes while enhancing border security. Her words were measured, sincere, and firm. The simmering frustration in Blake's eyes grew. He slammed his palm on the desk, standing abruptly. "You think you can come into my house and lie to my audience? You think because you're some hotshot lawyer from Texas you can outsmart me? I've been doing this longer than you've been in politics." The volume in the room spiked. Blake's red face and aggressive posture screamed confrontation. Yet Imani sat still, eyes locked on his, a slight, confident smile on her face. "When you're ready to have an adult conversation about policy differences," she said calmly, "I'm here. But if all you want is to yell and point fingers, you can do that without me." The silence that followed was electric. Blake blinked, momentarily stunned, his usual swagger replaced by uncertainty. The camera zoomed in on Imani's composed expression, an image that would soon ripple across social media and reshape public perception. Blake Ryland's voice was sharp and relentless as he launched into his rapid-fire questioning. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter, reflecting the intensity of the moment. Across from him, Imani Rhodes remained a picture of calm precision, answering each pointed question with measured clarity. "Congresswoman," Blake began, his tone biting, "you say you support working families, but your policies on taxes have led to higher costs for the middle class. How do you explain that?" Imani didn't hesitate. She cited the recent tax reforms that offered relief to low- and middle-income families, emphasizing data from her own district. "These policies are designed to provide direct support to those who need it most," she said. "In fact, many of my constituents have seen real benefits." Blake interrupted sharply. "That's just spin. The numbers don't add up, and you're avoiding the real issue." The crew leaned in, sensing the mounting tension. Blake's tactic was clear: disrupt, dominate, and unsettle. But Imani's composure never wavered. "Mr. Ryland," she responded evenly, "I'm here to discuss facts, not rhetoric. If you'd allow me to finish, I'd be happy to share more specifics." The studio audience, though unseen by viewers, felt the weight of the exchange. Blake's face reddened, frustration evident as he tried to reclaim control. He switched gears quickly. "Let's talk about immigration. Your party's approach has been called naive and dangerous. You represent a border district. Do you really think ignoring illegal crossings helps America?" Imani nodded thoughtfully. "I've spent significant time with Border Patrol agents and community leaders. Solutions must be balanced, securing borders while addressing the root causes of migration. This isn't a partisan issue. It's about humanity and practical policy." Blake's voice grew louder. "That's just political correctness. Your policies put American lives at risk." "I disagree," Imani replied firmly. "Effective policies come from listening, understanding, and working together. That's what I do." As the back and forth continued, Blake's interruptions became more frequent, his tone more accusatory. Yet Imani's replies were consistently calm and fact-based. She skillfully deflected provocations, refusing to be baited into shouting matches or emotional responses. Behind the camera, the crew noted the unusual dynamic. Blake, accustomed to guests breaking under pressure, was increasingly rattled. Imani's steadiness was disrupting his carefully crafted performance. At one point, Blake raised his voice sharply. "You think you can come here and lie to my audience? Admit it!" Imani smiled gently, a small but powerful gesture. "I'm here to speak the truth, Mr. Ryland, not to raise my voice." The studio air was thick with tension, but Imani's serene presence was unmistakable. Viewers at home would soon see this moment as a turning point, not just in the interview, but in the nature of political discourse itself. Blake Ryland's frustration was palpable as he struggled to maintain the upper hand. He leaned forward aggressively, eyes narrowed. "Congresswoman Rhodes, you talk about bipartisanship, but your voting record shows otherwise. How can voters trust someone who flips on key issues when convenient?" Imani maintained her composure. "My priority is serving my constituents with integrity and consistency. Policy evolves as we face new challenges, but my commitment to justice and fairness remains unwavering." Blake scoffed. "That's political doublespeak if I've ever heard it. You politicians say whatever it takes to stay in office." Imani responded calmly, "I understand skepticism. That's why I encourage voters to look at the facts, not just sound bites. Transparency and accountability are essential, and I hold myself to those standards." The tension rose as Blake ramped up his verbal assault. "Your party's policies are hurting American workers. Inflation is soaring, prices at the grocery store are up, and yet you're pushing agendas that make things worse." Imani met each accusation with data and real-life stories. Inflation is a complex issue influenced by many factors, including global supply chain disruptions and past fiscal policies. Meanwhile, we're working on initiatives to help families with energy costs, food assistance, and job training. Blake waved a hand dismissively. "Sounds like excuses. The American people aren't buying it." The back and forth continued, but Imani's steady tone and factual replies increasingly resonated with the audience, even as Blake's interruptions grew more desperate. As the interview progressed, Blake attempted a last-ditch effort to unsettle her. "Congresswoman, are you willing to admit that your party's approach to immigration is causing chaos at the border? People are scared." Imani took a deep breath and answered thoughtfully, "I acknowledge the challenges at the border, which is why I support comprehensive immigration reform. This means securing our borders while providing humane pathways to citizenship. Fear should not dictate policy. Reason and compassion should." Blake's impatience was evident, his voice rising again, but Imani held firm, refusing to be baited. Behind the scenes, producers exchanged glances. Blake's aggressive tactics weren't yielding the viral moment they expected. Instead, Imani's calm professionalism was turning the tide, painting a new picture. The momentum was shifting. Blake's face flushed with frustration, his usual confidence waning. The once energetic firebrand was now visibly unsettled by Imani's composed rebuttals. "Let me ask you this," Blake snapped, leaning closer across the desk. "How do you justify supporting bills that some say actually increase crime rates in border states? Aren't you concerned about your own constituents' safety?" Imani's gaze remained steady, her voice calm but resolute. "Public safety is paramount, Mr. Ryland. I have worked with local law enforcement to support effective community policing and programs aimed at reducing crime. It's simplistic to blame complex issues solely on immigration policies." Blake scoffed, shaking his head. "That's a convenient dodge. Many people feel ignored by politicians who don't face the real consequences." Imani nodded, acknowledging the concerns. "I hear those concerns and take them seriously. That's why I advocate for policies based on evidence and collaboration, not fear-mongering." The camera cut to Blake, who was clearly searching for a way to regain footing. He asked, "Do you really think your voters believe your narrative? Because a lot of folks I talk to say they're tired of excuses." Imani smiled gently. the kind of smile that conveyed both empathy and strength. "Mr. Ryland, I believe in honest dialogue and hard work. I invite your viewers to judge me by the results we deliver, not the rhetoric you prefer." For the first time, Blake's voice softened slightly, a hint of uncertainty creeping in. The aggressive edge was fading, replaced by a more cautious tone. The producers whispered quietly, sensing that Imani had not only survived the onslaught but had begun to turn it to her advantage. As the segment drew to a close, Blake attempted one final accusation. "Your party's agenda isn't about helping Americans. It's about politics and power. How do you respond to that?" Imani leaned forward, her voice steady and sincere. "I'm here to serve people, not politics. Every policy I support is aimed at improving lives. If that means challenging the status quo, so be it." The segment ended with Blake leaning back, a complex expression on his face, part frustration, part reluctant respect. Imani sat poised, the embodiment of professionalism and grace under pressure. As the cameras powered down, crew members exchanged glances, aware that the night's narrative had shifted. What was expected to be a crushing defeat for Imani had become a defining moment of strength and dignity. Blake Ryland's patience finally snapped. The tension in Liberty Sound Studios, already thick like Florida humidity, reached its breaking point. His face flushed a deep red, eyes blazing with frustration as he slammed his hand down on the polished oak desk, causing a sharp echo to ripple through the room. "You think you can come into my house and lie to my audience?" he bellowed, rising from his chair, his finger jabbing the air in accusation. "You think because you're some hotshot lawyer from Texas you can outsmart me? I've been doing this longer than you've been in politics." Across from him, Imani Rhodes remained seated, her posture unyielding, yet composed. A slight, confident smile curved her lips. Not smug, but assured, as if she had expected this outburst all along. "The calm before the storm," a crew member whispered under their breath, adjusting a camera angle to capture the moment. Imani's eyes never wavered. "If you want an adult conversation about policy differences," she said slowly, her voice steady and clear, "I'm here. But if you just want to yell and point fingers, you can do that without me." The room fell into a heavy silence. Blake blinked, momentarily stunned, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he struggled to maintain control. For the first time that night, his usual confident swagger faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Cameras zoomed in on Imani's steady gaze, her calm demeanor now the undeniable focal point of the broadcast. The stark contrast between the shouting man and the composed woman created a powerful visual narrative, one that would soon ripple across social media platforms nationwide. Behind the scenes, producers exchanged looks of surprise and excitement. This was not the viral moment they had anticipated, yet it was far more compelling. The interview had shifted from a simple confrontation to a masterclass in dignity and professionalism. Blake took a hesitant step back, his raised voice lowering. "I'm not yelling," he muttered defensively. "I'm passionate about defending my audience from politicians who don't tell the truth." Imani's smile softened but did not fade. "Mr. Ryland," she replied, "I have told the truth throughout this interview. I've provided facts, data, and specific examples. What I haven't done is yell, point fingers, or question your character." The audience at home, witnessing this exchange, found themselves drawn not to the aggression, but to the reasoned strength emanating from Imani. Comments and shares began flooding social media, many praising her composure and condemning Blake's outburst. As Blake sank back into his chair, his face still flushed, the dynamic in the room had irrevocably changed. Imani had not only weathered the storm, she had emerged as the calm center that drew everyone's attention. Blake Ryland sat back down, his breath heavy, the usual fire dimmed but not extinguished. The energy in the studio was shifting. The audience, both in the room and at home, had witnessed something unexpected. Imani Rhodes had stood firm in the face of his tempest, unmoved by the thunderous storm he unleashed. With a shaky voice, Blake pressed on, trying to regain some semblance of control. Congresswoman, some say you're out of touch with the real struggles Americans face. How do you respond to people who feel ignored and left behind? Imani's gaze softened but remained steady. I understand those feelings deeply. I come from a working-class family and have walked the same streets as many of my constituents. My work in civil rights law taught me to listen to those often unheard. That empathy guides my decisions in Congress. She leaned forward slightly, voice sincere. Leadership isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about standing for what's right, even when it's difficult. I'm committed to building bridges, not walls. Blake narrowed his eyes but nodded subtly, a glimmer of respect piercing through his frustration. Still, your critics say your party's policies have led to increased taxes and government overreach. Imani responded with quiet confidence. Policies must be fair and effective. I support measures that protect working families and small businesses, balanced with fiscal responsibility. It's not about politics. It's about people's lives. The cameras captured every nuance, the slight tightening of Blake's jaw, the calm assurance in Imani's posture. The studio lights highlighted their contrasting energies, a tableau of modern political discourse. As the interview progressed, Blake's attacks grew more calculated, but Imani's replies remained grounded. She skillfully turned his accusations into opportunities to articulate her vision for the future, a future built on facts, compassion, and unity. At one point, Blake attempted to unsettle her with a personal remark about her youth and experience. But Imani smiled knowingly. Experience is valuable, but wisdom and preparation matter just as much. I've spent years fighting for justice, and tonight is no different. The crew sensed the changing tide. Blake's usual dominance was slipping, replaced by cautious restraint. The broadcast was evolving from a spectacle of conflict into a lesson in poise and intellect. Closing the segment, Blake asked one final question, voice lower but deliberate. What would you say to Americans who feel politics has become a shouting match with no winners? Imani's reply was measured, resonant. I say, we need more conversations like this, honest, respectful, focused on solutions. It's time to move beyond the noise and work together for the common good. As the cameras powered down, the studio buzzed with quiet excitement. This was a moment that transcended partisan lines, a reminder that calm professionalism could prevail amid chaos. Blake Ryland's frustration was now palpable. The heated tension in Liberty Sound Studios seemed to crackle in the air as the conversation shifted toward immigration policy, one of the most divisive topics on the national stage. The bright studio lights highlighted Blake's reddened face and clenched fists as he leaned forward, his voice sharp and accusing. Congresswoman Rhodes, he said, your party's approach to immigration has been called naive and dangerous. How do you justify policies that some claim have created chaos at the border and put American lives at risk? Imani Rhodes listened carefully, her calm demeanor unwavering. She understood the gravity of the topic, not just as a politician, but as someone who had worked closely with border communities and law enforcement officials. I've spent significant time with Border Patrol agents, community leaders from both parties, and local residents, she replied steadily. The challenges at the border are real, but solutions must be balanced, securing our borders while addressing the root causes of migration through economic development and humanitarian aid. Blake's impatience was evident. He raised his voice, attempting to drown out her reasoned response. That's just political correctness. Your policies are putting American lives in danger. Imani's voice remained steady, her words measured. Fear and anger don't solve complex issues. Effective policy requires collaboration and empathy. I work with Republicans and Democrats alike to find practical, humane solutions. The studio crew watched intently as Blake struggled to regain control. His voice grew louder, his accusations more pointed, but Imani's replies were consistently calm and fact-based. She declined to be baited into shouting or personal attacks. At one point, Blake exclaimed, "My audience deserves better than your political games." Imani responded with a gentle but firm smile. I'm here to discuss real policies that affect real people. If you'd like to have a serious conversation, I'm ready. The contrast between Blake's escalating frustration and Imani's unwavering composure was striking. Viewers at home could sense the tension, but they were also drawn to Imani's strength. As the segment continued, Blake attempted to provoke a reaction, but Imani deflected with grace and intelligence. The interview was evolving into a masterclass in professionalism under pressure. Behind the scenes, the production team whispered about the unexpected turn. Blake's aggressive tactics had failed to produce the viral meltdown they sought. Instead, Imani's poise was capturing the audience's respect and admiration. The interview ended with Blake sitting back, defeated, but unwilling to admit it. Imani thanked him graciously, her demeanor unchanged. As the cameras continued rolling, Blake Ryland's agitation became more evident. His voice rose again, sharp and forceful. Congresswoman Rhodes, some say your party ignores the economic struggles of everyday Americans. Inflation is soaring, gas prices are through the roof, and yet you support policies that seem to make things worse. How do you respond to that? Imani's gaze remained steady and composed. Inflation is indeed a serious concern, she acknowledged, but it's caused by a complex set of factors, including global supply chain disruptions and previous fiscal policies. Our focus must be on practical measures that provide relief to families, such as energy assistance programs, food security initiatives, and job training. Blake shook his head skeptically. Sounds like excuses to me. The American people want results, not talking points. With calm determination, Imani replied, I understand the urgency for results. That's why I work tirelessly to support legislation that addresses these challenges head-on. It's not about politics. It's about improving lives. The back and forth continued, with Blake raising his voice more frequently, trying to provoke a reaction. Yet Imani's demeanor never wavered. Her responses were thoughtful, precise, and full of empathy for the people she served. At one point, Blake accused her of being out of touch, questioning her connection to her district. Imani smiled gently. I'm deeply connected to my community. I grew up working multiple jobs to support my education. I know firsthand the struggles many face. The interview's intensity built as Blake attempted to unsettle her further. But Imani's professionalism shone through, earning nods of respect even from some members of the production team. As the segment drew to a close, Blake made one last effort. My audience deserves honesty and passion, not political games. Imani leaned forward slightly, her voice firm but kind. Honesty and passion are what I bring to this conversation. I'm here to listen, to serve, and to lead. The cameras finally powered down, the atmosphere in the studio noticeably lighter. Though the battle had been fierce, Imani had proven herself a formidable presence, calm, confident, and unwavering. Blake Ryland's frustration had reached its peak. The heat from the studio lights seemed to reflect the fire burning inside him as he faced Congresswoman Imani Rhodes. Despite his loud accusations and aggressive posture, she remained an unyielding pillar of calm professionalism. Congresswoman, Blake said, voice rising, you and your party play political games with people's lives. How do you justify that to your constituents who are struggling every day? Imani met his gaze steadily. Mr. Ryland, I'm here to serve the people, not politics. Every policy I support is aimed at improving lives, from healthcare access to education and economic opportunity. Blake's eyes flashed. But many say your policies are making things worse. Inflation, crime, immigration chaos. These are real problems, yet you ignore them. Imani nodded thoughtfully. I take those concerns seriously. That's why I work with local leaders and bipartisan groups to find solutions that address the root causes, not just symptoms. The room crackled with tension as Blake's attacks grew sharper, yet Imani's responses remained measured, her tone steady. At one point, Blake stood abruptly, his finger pointed accusingly. "You think you can come here and spin the truth for my audience? I've been doing this longer than you've been in politics." Imani smiled gently, unmoved by the outburst. "Experience is important, but so is integrity and preparation. I've spent years fighting for justice and fairness." Her words landed like a calm tide against Blake's storm. The studio crew watched as the tide turned. Blake's fiery energy faltered, his confident swagger replaced by visible frustration. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Imani's voice dropped slightly, steady and clear. "If you want an adult conversation about policy differences, I'm here. But if you just want to yell and point fingers, you can do that without me." The room went silent. Blake's face flushed. He sat down, breathless, caught off guard. The cameras captured it all. The clear shift of power, the moment when calm professionalism triumphed over aggression. As the interview drew to a close, Imani thanked Blake graciously. The crew buzzed with excitement. This was no ordinary interview. It was a defining moment. The studio fell into a quiet calm as Blake Ryland slumped back into his chair, his face flushed with the heat of the moment, but his voice noticeably subdued. The fierce spark of his earlier aggression had dimmed, replaced by an almost reluctant acceptance. Across from him, Congresswoman Imani Rhodes maintained her composed demeanor, the epitome of professionalism and grace. Blake cleared his throat, his voice softer, but still tinged with defensiveness. "Look, I'm passionate about defending my audience from politicians who don't tell the truth. If that comes across as yelling, so be it." Imani met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Ryland, throughout this interview, I've provided facts, data, and real examples. I have not raised my voice or questioned your character. It's clear where the contrast lies." The air was thick with unspoken acknowledgement. The audience watching at home could sense the shift, the moment when the narrative changed from confrontation to reflection. Imani continued, her tone warm yet firm. "I'm here to serve my constituents, to have honest conversations about the challenges facing our country. That requires listening, respect, and a commitment to truth." Blake nodded slowly, the fight seemingly drained from him. He looked toward the cameras, his expression a mix of frustration and reluctant respect. Behind the scenes, the production crew began to relax, exchanging smiles and quiet congratulations. The interview had unfolded in a way none had predicted, a showcase of dignity, triumphing over discord. Imani rose gracefully, offering Blake a sincere thank you for the opportunity. Her words were simple, but carried the weight of someone who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. As the studio lights dimmed and the crew began to pack up, the story was just beginning to spread. Clips of the interview quickly went viral, praised across social and traditional media for the powerful display of calm professionalism amid chaos. For Imani Rhodes, this moment was not just a victory in one interview. It was a defining chapter in a career built on resilience, intelligence, and unwavering grace. The camera captured her final silhouette walking away from the studio, calm, collected, and ready for the challenges ahead. In the quiet aftermath of that intense encounter, a deeper truth settles softly in the heart. True strength often reveals itself not in raised voices or heated arguments, but in the calm dignity with which one stands firm. This story, unfolding amid the noisy clash of politics, gently reminds us that grace under pressure can illuminate even the darkest rooms. At its core, this tale teaches us the value of steadfastness, holding on to our principles with humility and quiet courage. Such resolve does more than reclaim justice. It builds bridges where walls once stood, fostering healing in communities long tested by hardship. The Black community, with its rich history of resilience and quiet strength, exemplifies this truth. Time and again, it has shown how dignity and unwavering faith can spark change in even the most challenging times. This narrative resonates deeply within the Black community's ongoing journey, reminding us all that true leadership does not shout the loudest, but rather speaks with steady conviction. It's a reminder that courage is sometimes found in the stillness of one's voice and the firmness of one's stance, rather than in the heat of battle. Much like a candle glowing softly by a window on a cold night, acts of calm kindness and truth-telling can light the way through life's most uncertain paths. This gentle illumination is what carries families, neighborhoods, and entire communities forward. The Black community knows well the power of such light, a beacon passed from generation to generation, guiding the way through struggles toward hope and renewal. As you reflect on this story, consider how the lessons of patience, poise, and unwavering integrity apply to your own life and to the communities you hold dear. It is in these moments of quiet courage that we find our greatest power to effect change. The story reminds us all to look beyond appearances and assumptions. For sometimes, the truth and justice we seek come from the places we least expect, often from the very hearts we might overlook. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you of the strength found in calm resolve, consider sharing its warmth with those who need it most. Together, we can continue to nurture the legacy of hope and courage so deeply rooted in the Black community, spreading light in a world that too often seems shrouded in noise and division.